Hans, it doesn't want to switch. Aha. Okay. This is my mind map. There's the trunk in the middle, the branches of the trees going out sideways, and lots of information. The idea is to imprint this on your mind for future reference. How's that? You see the start button here? And I really enjoyed Tom with the way he did his predictions. The important thing is that you have to predict where your satellite is going to be. Now, at first, you need to know which satellite you will be interested in. And in doing that, the whole object of the exercise is so that you can have an uplink to a satellite and a downlink, and of course, vice versa. Uplink, downlink. Tom showed also the same kind of picture, so I hope you all listened closely. A whole Earth view of the orbiting satellites. These are mainly polar orbital satellites, meaning that they cover from the north to the south in this format. And you can see that many satellites have different footprints, or one satellite goes around the world at different times. Now, why do we call it polar orbiting? It's because they go north-south or south-north from your observation point, meaning your QDH. Now, the whole object of the exercise is to show you that you can do satellite communication, especially with a low Earth orbit satellite, like in this picture, where this operator points the antenna to the satellite and communicates via portable radio. A little more when we go on. This is our uplink, downlink, remember? This is the possible orbits. Now, if you go to the AMSAT North America website, you'll find a status report on satellites. This is a list of satellites that has been, it's a snapshot June 8th and June 7th. The blue indicates those satellites that were operated on by radio amateurs at different times. This is the month of June, or rather June the 8th, and you can see that there were all the blues that was busy. Now, I want to talk mainly about the FM satellites, the so-called FM satellites. Reason being they're the simplest to work. AO91 over there, it was on that particular point that AO91 on June 8th was used, and so forth. The blue is a report taken from one or more stations and published here. And if it's a certainty, it turns blue. If it's a possibility, it's orange. If it's a dud satellite, nothing heard, it's red, as a rule. AO95, unfortunately, is not working anymore. There was a possible observation, but it's debatable. Then if we go down to CAS-4B, which is also a nice FM satellite, it was worked there. Then right down here, and of course this list goes on and on. I just made one snapshot. If you go down, the ISS, International Space Station, it was very popular in June and quite popular in July for a few slots orbits there was activity. If you look on the left, you'll see a prediction of a satellite. Let's take this one for instance, which is uplink 145-900 and downlink 435-800. And if I'm not mistaken, this was AO91. The important part to note here is it made a 55-degree elevation pass over near my QTH. This is where I sit at the moment, and it passed at 55 degree, which is quite a high elevation, very useful for portable work and simple work. Then on the right, this is Fuji Oscar 29, another useful satellite, and this one indicates a 23 degree, which is quite a low low elevation from my QTH, and more difficult to work with a simple setup due to the satellite distance. To go back to our mind map, I've shown you now where you can look for activity, pick your satellite, go and do your predictions. Now, to make life simple, and rather than difficult like I believe Tom did, is there are many programs for Android. And I personally use a cell phone, and I've got Heavens Above, which is this application that gives us this display. Very simple. You just let it find your own QTH longitude, latitude, and it automatically syncs. So you don't even see your long lat. You can observe it if you want, but it automatically finds the GPS satellite in your area, and your cell phone locks on it. That is after you've opened the program. Then you pick your satellite, and you get these predictions. One of these two. And you know when the satellite is going to come over, and when at least there'll be apogee, the highest point or closest point to you, and where the loss of signal will be. Then, so you'll know the times, and you'll know the azimuth position and also the elevation. So, let's look at different orbits to make things maybe a little clearer. If you look at the Earth as we know it, or some of us, if you don't believe in the flat Earth society, there are satellites in polar orbits. This one, that's predominantly at an inclination. That's the angle between the equator and the satellite orbit, the inclination, typically close to 90 degrees. Then, or the other way around, it's either on the left or the right of the pole. Then you get your, that's your polar orbit. Then you get your equator, or at least low Earth orbit, with a much lower inclination to the equator, typically 54 degrees, thereabouts. And this is typically the ISS. The ISS does that type of thing. Also low Earth orbit, meaning something like 450 to 550 kilometers away from Earth, at its nearest point. And here's the geostationary orbit, Oscar AO100, the Qatar satellite, which is that's a great achievement. This one is in a high equatorial orbit, geostationary, 35,000 plus kilometers. and not easy to work with a handheld, impossible really. You've got the highly elliptical orbit. We were told by Hannes that there was phase 3A, B, C, and D, where phase A fell into the sea. Now this happened in the 80s. I worked Oscar 10, which was AO3B, and at the time we had a station at the University of Pretoria, that is 6 Texas Uniform Kilo, and we even had a relay station at one exhibition where hams came in and worked the phase 3B via the link station at TUK. We had a guy who did manual switching between the uplink and the downlink in the shack at TUK, and I tell you, his hands worked like playing the piano. But it worked quite well, and it was a fantastic satellite. Then Oscar 13, phase 3T, was very effective. However, it favored the higher frequencies, the 2.4 gig, the L-band, S-band 2.4 and the L-band 1296, and those frequencies because of technical problems. Then there was the, they both, Oscar 10 died from possible radiation. Phase 3C unfortunately flew into the Earth due to apparently the pull of the sun and the moon, and it deorbited at its perigee, dropped. And I happened to listen, and I can't remember the date now, but it was somewhere in the 90s, beginning of 90s. I listened the night, I think it was nighttime in South Africa, listened to the signal, the beacon signal, till it disappeared. And it actually deorbited, I think the next day. I lost track of it. Perhaps it was already burning up, or it disappeared on the other side of the Earth. Because with a elliptical orbit, highly elliptical, you have up to 14 or more hours visibility in apogee. Now, I love the way that Hannes said the highly elliptical orbit satellites did not favor South Africa because the apogee happened to be over the northern horizon, northern hemisphere. But due to a technical glitch yet again, I won't go in on the details, the firing to get the satellite eventually into a elliptical orbit failed. The actual firing happened, but it fired too long. There was a timing problem, and the onboard rocket motor fired too long, and it increased, and they did not in the end achieved the magical 64 degrees inclination of the Earth to place the apogee in the northern hemisphere. So what happened? The first 2 or 3 years, the satellite favored the southern hemisphere. Of course, the northern hemisphere was very upset, but we had a very good time working the satellite. Now to get back to the LEO, the low Earth orbit satellites, the FM satellites. To work them, which I suggest everybody try once in their life at least, or restart at the moment. I happen to be one of those starters who restarted. I started in the early 80s, worked Oscar 7, beautiful satellite, very cleverly put together. Dr. Carl Meinzer was a wizard who built the, or rather who designed the transponder, and till today it works. It was launched in 74, and to this day you can work it. It's about 1,500 kilometers apogee, and it's one of the two satellites where we can make fairly long distance contact with a LEO satellite. So if we go back to, we've done our predictions, we looked at the orbits, and we decided, okay, we want to work the LEO orbit, most probably Oscar AO91. And the next step, what is the next step? Before we pick our mode and our frequencies, let's look at the effect of Doppler. You must have heard of Doppler. If an observer, let me get to a better picture. If an observer sits here, a source like a motor car or siren comes from this side. It sounds like when it passes you and go the other way, the source moving closer and the source moving away. It sounds like meow. I'll do it again. Meow. I wonder if you caught the pitch. It starts high in frequency and it gets low in frequency. Now this effect is the thing that bites you in the backside. The Doppler effect. If you go to VHF over here and UHF, microwave, the higher the frequency, the worse your Doppler effect. It depends on basically three things. The amount of Doppler you will, that is frequency change in your actual signal. So when your satellite comes and it approaches you, the satellite actually sounds like it's at a higher frequency. Now vice versa, you transmit on your uplink and the satellite sees you as a higher frequency, but the satellite has got a fixed frequency receiver. Therefore, you have to change your uplink frequency, most probably, to get into the passband of the receiver on that satellite. Your downlink is then high frequency your side, so you listen higher than the actual transmit frequency of the satellite. As it progresses, as it comes closer to your QDH, you have to tune your receiver to get into the passband. In other words, the frequency will drop and you will go down in frequency till the satellite is closest to you. And that will be then the frequency where things will change. From then on, the satellite passes you and the frequency goes lower. So you've got to go lower in frequency, negative. We call it negative Doppler and positive Doppler. And you must cater for that at all times. And unfortunately, because the satellite in low Earth orbit moves very fast compared to the observer, there are three things that must be borne in mind. The one is the actual frequency that you operate on for receive and transmit, where your highest frequency gives you the worst Doppler effect. Also, the range rate. That is how quick the speed with which the satellite approaches your QDH. Then also, or the observer. Also, the elevation angle determines the change rate. So it's not the speed of the satellite as such, around in the orbit, the orbital speed. It's actually the speed it approaches you. Now, that you have to bear in mind all the time. For high elevation passes, if you go to our predictions, for the higher elevation, you find that your Doppler move is also faster. Your Doppler change, your frequency change, is faster the closer it gets to you. If it's above you, it's 0, because there's no relative speed from between the satellite and yourself on that tangent. So the moment it goes past you, things change again, and you must go lower in frequency on your receive side. Now, the golden rule is, if you can't, it's very difficult to change your transmit and receive frequencies while you use a radio, a transceiver, if it's all manual. So you must decide. It's proven to be best that if you use a FM satellite and you've got VHF and UHF uplinks and downlinks, which is normally used, then you will rather adjust your UHF frequency, because the Doppler shift is more noticeable. It's worse on the UHF frequency. Therefore, if your receive frequency is UHF, you'll only tune your receive frequency from high to low. Your VHF you'll keep on the satellite frequency, and hopefully you'll keep in the satellite band. However, if there's a operator with sophisticated equipment and he can tune his transmitter and receiver to stay exactly in the middle of the satellite band and exactly on frequency on his receiver, the chances are that if you work only one frequency at a time, you will miss each other. Or if you happen to meet each other, the person with changing both frequencies will move away from you. Or you'll find that you're on a different receive frequency than him, because no two QDHs is in the same spot. To go back to our Doppler shift position and hop to our mode, I say the easiest thing to do with a portable, for instance, portable radio, is to work FM satellites, which is typically your AO91, your FO29, and the ISS, of course. The 2 nights ago, or rather 2 mornings ago, at 9 o'clock in the morning, the ISS came over, and I listened to 3 guys, 3 ZS hams. The one was in the Cape, ZS1 Tango Alpha, and 2 others up in Gauteng. They worked the ISS at 9 o'clock 2 days ago. And there's even a recording made of the QSA, which was very nice. The trick with the ISS, though, is that it's got a narrowband receiver, and it uses a UHF downlink and a VHF uplink. And if you don't stay on your Doppler frequencies, because the ISS is one of the lowest low Earth orbit satellites, limited satellite, you've got to cater for that. I battled so much when I tried to work the ISS about a year ago for the first time, after I restarted working satellites. I battled so much with the Doppler that a guy took pity on me, and he sent me a file that one can use on the chip program to program your handheld. That made the world of difference, Before, I used only a half duplex, meaning a transceiver where you switch from upper sideband to lower sideband. You don't have the capability to work both simultaneously. When I used to, before that, I used to work LEO satellites with 2 transmitters, 2 transceivers, one on receive, one on transmit, and 2 different antennas. I use the fixed antenna for transmit, and on the receive side, I used a Yagi with a 12 dB gain, which gave me horizon to horizon communication on the LEO satellite. I worked from the Cape up to Zimbabwe and one or two islands. I actually worked one island, listened to two. Very, very interesting. That was with two rigs, two antennas where you can work and listen to yourself. You can actually net on the other person, and it's easy to do. But you need at least a directional antenna, a bit of extra gain perhaps. So I had a 5-element Yagi with a 12 dB receiver. But to come back to my portable work, being now one of the camping fraternity, I use one handheld, and I do what this operator does over here. I use one handheld, I use a cell phone for my predictions, and I use earphone microphone, and I use the AMSAT Yagi, being 3-element on 77s and 2 elements on 2 meters. So you pick your mode. Now let's stick with FM for the moment. You go to you from your satellite regional prediction, you know which satellite to use and whether the downlink is UHF and the uplink is VHF. And in AO91's case, Oscar 91, it's a UHF up and VHF down. Okay. Then there's another snag. You set your radio to the frequencies. Now you must also open the transponder on the actual satellite. And that you do by transmitting one of these continuous tone code Squelch system frequencies. It's low audio frequencies. Often in AO91's case, this is what the satellite looks like. Unfortunately, you don't see the antennas that's deployed. We'll see that probably later with the presentation later this afternoon. SO50 has just got a little whip antenna, and I must admit it's a little deaf. You need to work a high elevation pass normally to work SO50 successfully. But AO90 is a very sensitive FM satellite. No problem working it with 5 watt portable handheld with at least the AMSAT Yagi. There are guys like ZS3 Whiskey Lima in the Northern Cape who works often with a rubber ducky and his handheld, and quite well so. One advantage of the AO91 series of satellites, the Red Foxes, 1B, this particular one, is that they got quite good automatic frequency control on their transponders. So the Doppler shift they cater for by at least 2.5 plus minus 2.5 kc, so kilohertz rather. So it's easier to stay in the satellite passband, and also makes it more pleasant to work. Okay, you need to transmit for the AO91 a 67 Hz tone. So you must program this in your handheld to transmit continuously this audio tone. Now obviously you can't hear it, and the satellite doesn't hear it, for there's filters built in to eliminate the 67 Hz. It doesn't get to your earphones, fortunately. The SO50 is one of the satellites that they don't leave the transponder on. They want you to switch it on. It's got a 10-minute timer on board. You switch it on by transmitting 74.4 Hz CTCS code on the uplink frequency, and the satellite will switch on after you've kept that tone going for 2 seconds. It's quick enough to stay in the correct Doppler shift addition or subtraction for that matter. And then thereafter you've got to switch to 67 Hertz to continuous. To keep it continuous on, obviously you switched off to 74.4 Hertz, and it will remain on for 10 minutes, and then the transponder will switch off. Now typically your window to work the satellite will be something like maximum 10 minutes, so it's no hardship. The trick is, what I used to do, or still do, is you listen out for the big gun stations. They switch the satellite on for you and you climb aboard, and it works like a charm. Obviously you pick up the satellite a little later than the big guns, so it works out quite well. So now you've got your frequencies, you've got your hopefully programmed in, you've got your mode chosen to FM, and you are ready to go. Going back to our mind map, you've done all this from here right round. Now you work the radio. You wait for the antenna, for the satellite to come over the horizon. You listen for a signal, and the big guns come in. There is one TA from the Cape, obviously, often. Also, there is 2 Boston kilowatt from PE, and so on and so forth. And you make contact with them, and you try and keep up by tuning your receive frequency in the case of the receiving frequency being UHF. Otherwise, you'll change your transmit frequency, and if that is the highest, you'll always use your highest frequency to tune with. Okay, now you make contact and you give a signal strength and a position report. Your locator is probably the best to give your position. And then if you're lucky, you can say a few other words. Otherwise, you've got to do the Doppler shift thing and try and pick up again. Now, should you be lucky to have a home station, oops, you can do this. Put up the vertical antenna, which I've done, and then my one all-time favorite is a disco, not disco antenna, a turnstile antenna with circular polarization. There's your radiator, your reflector, and there's your radiator. It's got a nice apple polar diagram. Your vertical antenna has got an apple polar diagram, but only in vertical polarity, whereas this one is omnidirectional for satellite work. Perfect. Or you do what the big guns do. You go in and you have a rotator for azimuth and a rotator for elevation, and you have a 2-meter antenna, a 77 antenna, 1296. This happened to be one ZS1 TA setup. He's quite a champion in many frequencies and satellite communication. I listened to his commentary when he worked a Russian station on a ship in the harbor at Brazil via Oscar 7, AO7, the LEO satellite, the longest living satellite ever, radio amateur satellite, that's still operational. It had its sleep moments, but it came to life some years ago, and it's still active. Only in sunlight, though. Oscar 7. This is the AMSATSA, for those who don't know it. It's got one single feed point. Therefore, it's better when you use 2 rigs to use some kind of diplexer. I use it only with one portable rig, programmed in 5 kilohertz steps every for 3 up frequencies, then the actual satellite frequency, then 3 more frequencies going negative. In other words, lower down in frequency again. You have to program that in your rig because it's very difficult. I tried to work 2 rigs manually. I find it not possible except if you can hear yourself. If you use the same rig and you try to transmit and receive at the same time, it does not work. Trust me. Summary. Pick the satellite you want to work. Heat the Doppler shift implications. Start with frequency high, 15 kilohertz plus maximum. By the way, that is typically a 0 degree. Virtually 0 degree. Say 10 degree above the horizon. You'll sit typically at 15 kilohertz higher, and for 2 meter you'll sit at 5 kilohertz. And by the way, these frequencies, 2.5 kilohertz steps is nicer, but I found that 5 kilohertz steps work quite well. The advantage of 10 and up to about 40 degree elevation, the advantage there is that you have a slower Doppler shift and lesser Doppler shift. So you sit at your worst case, plus 15 kilohertz, but it changes much slower. So you can keep track much easier. I used to love listening to stations virtually on the horizon and working the big guns who's got the sensitivity to hear even your weak handheld signal. And I didn't have to do much Doppler correction going from about 10 degrees to 40 degrees. If it goes overhead, you work yourself silly doing the receive side, but of course you've got a very strong signal. You even beat the big guns who's far away from you, HI. You choose obviously your modulation mode. Oops. Set up your uplink and downlink frequencies. Set up continuous tone squelch. Set up your antenna in the correct azimuth elevation. Listen for activity during predicted time slot. Adjust only your UHF to follow the Doppler shift signal. Oh yes, and keep your squelch open. That is one golden rule. And practice. Practice makes perfect. I've got some references and acknowledgements in the addendum. And these sites are the obvious sites to go to for satellite information. New, old, name it what you will. There are many other sites. If you just Google satellite frequency, you get them all. It's very easy, as long as you've got a smartphone and you can do Mrs. Google.